I was thinking about Avinu Malkeinu as we were singing it and saying it, and the fact is that there are, in some communities, 14 verses, 22 verses, 44 verses of Avinu Malkeinu, so we have 8 or 9. And what it begs is the question, what's the Avinu Malkeinu in your heart that isn't on the page? God, have mercy over our children, our children's children, sure. God, give us peace in the new year, absolutely. But those are generalist prayers, aren't they? They're the best of Hallmark prayer books. It's saying, I know what human beings need to pray in this moment, but it doesn't say, I know what you need to pray in this moment. Your personal prayer. On Shabbat, our custom is not to ask anything of God. So it's a question, why on the Shabbat of Shabbats, the Holy of Holies, we come before Avinu and Malkeinu, two separate faces of God. One is a parent that's compassionate and close to us, that sees us eye to eye. And the other is Malkeinu, something that we have to approach with care, with a certain kind of fear, perhaps. A ruler, a king. Avinu Malkeinu, we might add at the end of that, let me pray my prayer to you. So I give you just a moment for that prayer. Two men are sitting watching an old John Wayne movie. This is right out of the Torah. And one turns to the other and he says, I'll bet you $5 that in the next 5 minutes, John Wayne's going to fall off his horse. The other guy says, you're on, $5. Within 3 minutes, John Wayne falls off his horse. And one looks at the other says, I know, he pulls out his money. The other says, I can't take your money, I've seen the movie before. And his friend says, I know, I've seen it as well. And he says, you've seen the movie before, so why did you bet that he wouldn't fall off his horse? He said, I didn't think John Wayne would make the same mistake twice. I'm afraid that we Jewish people have made the same mistake many, many, many times, time after time after time. We've made one mistake of believing that anti-Semitism had gone away because we weren't aware of it or because the news stories were in other cities and other countries. We made the other mistake of believing that anti-Semitism itself would cure anti-Semitism. That the barbarity that is anti-Semitism would be so heinous that no human being could see what we've seen and allow that to perpetuate. How can that happen? How can people see video and anecdotal and written and photographic evidence of the Shoah and even pogroms from the turn of the last century, the 1800s to the 1900s, and not see the barbarity and say that has to stop, no matter who we are, human beings? It should have cured itself. An illness that cures an illness. As long as our eyes are open and we're human and therefore capable of humanity, how could we see anti-Semitism? Not we, but they, all of us, this world, and not see it as something that immediately has to stop. That's our moral naivete. And another mistake that I think we sometimes make is to think that the Jewish person who doesn't tip well at the restaurant, or the Jewish person who's loud in public places, or the Jewish person who is criminal in public places, in the news, front page, headlines, names that you and I know, or the Jewish person who is in the other political party that we loathe, is somehow the source of anti-Semitism. I want to put that into context. That's weather. Anti-Semitism is climate. There was a time in history, think about Charles V, the emperor. He needed a surgeon, and he insisted that it should be a Jewish surgeon. So somebody brought him a Jewish surgeon. He asked the man before he would operate on him, "Are you in fact Jewish?" The man said, "Actually, I'm a convert, so I was Jewish, but my family a generation ago converted out of Judaism." He sent him away. He said, "I want a Jew to do surgery on me." And another Jewish man, born Jewish, came to the king, to the emperor, and he in fact performed the surgery on him. Because we're a people of learning, there's something unique about us. I don't think we're unique because of our genetics, 23andMe, ancestry. That doesn't tell us anything about the Jewish story, about Jewish perpetuity, survival, genius, commitment, endurance, loyalty. 23andMe doesn't say Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael is something that I feel and know here and here. But why did Charles V, the emperor, insist on it being a Jewish surgeon? Not because he loved Jews, but because he wanted somebody who was schooled in Talmud, Mishnah, Gemara, argument, analytical thinking. He wanted that kind of person raised in a household that revered those values, that raised him with that kind of rigor to be the one who cuts him open and puts them back together again. We are less than 2%, less than 0.2% of the world population, and yet you and I take great pride in the fact that 25% of the Nobel Prizes go to Jewish people. We should be proud of that. 25% to 0.2%. But again, bragging is fine, but look at it and ask yourself again, is that because we're genetically predispositioned to greatness? No, I think it's because we are destined by our journey, by our learning, by our study, by our commitment to being better and bettering ourselves as a community, as one another, and ourselves as individuals. That's the reason that I saw on one of the social media platforms a boy, Rosenthal the last name, and he's invented some way of creating Band-Aids and first aid kits on the sides of sports fields through vending machines. A company offered this little boy, he's about 13, 14 years old, $30 million for his invention. And I thought, okay, I wonder if that kid went to Jewish day school. It's not just tech, but it doesn't only make sense that we're in tech and do well in that. Because if you look at the study of Judaism, it is so technical, it is so rigorous, that if you come to it from early age, you start to realize that the world is a puzzle and your job is to put it together and take it apart again and argue with it and put it together again. Early anti-Semitism was based on religion. It was oriented to who and what we were and what we weren't. We were rejected for what we didn't believe and rejected for what we believed. We were committed to a certain way of practicing our religion, which was a relationship with God based on our prayers and our mitzvot, the idea that we were placed in this world, you and I individually, to do something in the course of our lifetime that will create a repair in this God-forsaken, broken world. That's the Jewish relationship to God. But at the same time, it was a rejection of newer religions that emerged. And we didn't sit in the living rooms and the kitchens and at the dining tables of our non-Jewish friends and neighbors because the food wasn't kosher and the plates weren't kashered. And kashered and kosher had great meaning to Jews until about 100 years ago. And we prayed in Hebrew because we were committed to that form of prayer. We didn't want to leave what God had told us to do in the prayer book that is the prayer book that is the prayer book that is Torah. Prayer through the life lessons of people, patriarchs and matriarchs. Moses, who stood with a staff and led a people through thick and through thin, through water and dry land. We learned through that what it is to be a Jewish people, Am Yisrael. And that religiously oriented anti-Semitism led to ostracization, vilification, exile. It led to us being mutilated and tortured and exiled from lands across the globe. And anti-Semitism mutated, it shapeshifted. It became what today we might call identity-based anti-Semitism. People weren't concerned about what we did and didn't do, our religious practices and behaviors and our beliefs. They were concerned with who we were as a category. And that's the most dangerous condition for humanity. Just think for a moment. The Nazis used calipers to calibrate the size of our heads because they wanted to prove that we were Negroid, black. Is that astonishing? Where did they learn that from? American racial law that preceded it. As soon as you're in a category, it's one step to being a number. It's another step to being annihilated. This kind of racial, ethnic anti-Semitism didn't make sense because we're not a race. And we're not an ethnicity. Just ask all the people of different races and ethnicity in the Jewish world. Different skin color and language and culture and food. Jewish people of all sorts coming from all parts of this planet, this world, all saying, I am part of Am Yisrael. And yet we were destroyed for being part of this on the basis of race. Not our beliefs, not the scrolls and the books that we read, not the candles that we lit. They were of little importance to the people who wanted to see us destroyed. It was that we were other. Now consider for a moment something so startling. I talked about race and Jews not being the correct race. Think about the fact that in this moment we are to the radical right, not white enough, and to the radical left, too white. That's the condition of Jews in this moment. That's a dangerous place to be. That's a precarious place. When you fit in a seam between what is legitimate and good and what is loved. And somehow you're something in between, and people don't know quite how to grapple with who you are. So that religious anti-Semitism that morphed, that mutated, that shape-shifted into this kind of ethnic, ethnocentric, identity-oriented anti-Semitism then took another turn and brought us to the moment that we're in right now, which is the anti-Semitism that you and I see on Fox and CNN and MSNBC and here on NPR and every network that there is and read in all the papers of the world. And it's based on the Jewish people having a state. In about 1880, Theodor Herzl had a vision. He imagined the Jewish people would be restored to their rightful homeland. He imagined that that biblical scroll would lead us ultimately and finally back to where we always were, but never were as a modern nation state. And Herzl had this vision, he had this goal, he had the audacity to dream. He dreamt that people would be speaking the biblical language, the language of the prophets, Hebrew, on the mountaintops of the Galilee and down on the sand dunes of Tel Aviv. Imagine that in 1880. And then, by virtue of international decree and international law and multiple international agreements, a state was founded. Now, why do I emphasize that it was by international law and dictate? Because it wasn't us. We didn't come in on horses or tanks. Our armies didn't ride like the Assyrians and the Greeks and the Babylonians and the Mamelukes and the Crusaders and the Byzantines and the Persians and the Ottomans and the British. We didn't come in to conquer a land. We came in because the international community, the nations of the world said, this is the rightful home of the Jewish people. And if you're not aware, originally the land, the home that we were given was much larger than what you are in today in Eretz Yisrael, even including what we know of as the West Bank. But think about the fact that Israel, since the first moments of its rebirth in the 20th century, has been a source of hatred, of vilification, of targeting, of violence, of constant war since its first day as a state. It wasn't a Jewish or Israeli army that came to conquer, to say, we're going to plant our flag, this is our land, let's put border fences around it. That didn't happen. That's not history. What happened was people dreamt long before a Holocaust that stateless, vulnerable Jews would one day, hopefully in their lifetime in Herzl's case, be able to see Jews restored to some kind of safety that we never had in other countries, To be a Jew in Europe, and most of us, our family, 2 generations ago, maybe 3, were Jews in Europe, was to live with a vulnerability that you and I as American Jews might think we feel now, but don't feel. We were never French enough to be French, German enough to be German. No matter where we were in society, how learned we were, how studious, how wealthy, how integrated we felt in the society, time after time we realized that we were always Jewish and not German, Jewish and not French, Jewish and not, fill in the blank. So when you look at where we are today, you consider that we have more than 200 countries in the world. Now we're past the age of empires, we're in the age of nation states, the age of now, the age of the 20th and 21st century. More than 200 countries, 193 of them or 197 of them are members of the United Nations, and yet there's only one country whose very existence is in question in every agenda of that world body. Now, if you say it's not anti-Semitism, then make a case. If you say it's not anti-Semitism, when somebody holds a placard and holds a Jewish star with the equal sides and then says oppressor, demonic, all these words that we see on placards on campuses, then make a case, make a moral argument for that. But I look at history, and I also look at the fact that Germany started 2 world wars. The Iranians and the Congolese put child soldiers on the front lines and killed 50 to 100,000 of their own people. The Syrians killed nearly 1 million of their own people. Look at all the wars and all of the issues of concern and of violence and of true oppression in our world today, and ask yourself and answer me why it is that one country, the Jewish state, with the Magen, the shield of King David on its flag, is the target of vitriol and anti-Semitism and calls for annihilation. Not Germany, not Iran, not Iraq, not Canada, Israel. A number of weeks ago, Jewish university students were convened, many of them via Zoom, from all the universities around the country. It was an incredible, incredible sight, seeing these Jewish kids from Harvard, from Penn, from CSUN, from UCLA, all the campuses. And the interviewers wanted to understand what they were experiencing, what they were feeling. And one of the questions that the interviewer asked was, if you were to feel endangered, threatened by faculty or by another student, to whom would you go? Do you know that not one student said the administration? They said, my rabbi at home. They said, Hillel. They said, Chabad. Not one said the administration. The kids, those college kids, some of whom are here tonight, kids who have graduated recently or still in college, those kids feel a tension in their belly that they didn't feel, that maybe we didn't feel in our college days. This is the year when I've had people call and ask me, Rabbi, my daughter wants to know, she's at this university or lives in this town, can she take her mezuzah off her wall, off her door? Or should I stop wearing my Magen David, my Star of David? Or one of our members, Kim Anton, wrote a fantastic article about the fear that she felt, the consternation she's felt when her daughter said, I am wearing this star. And she as a mother said, I want to, but I don't have the courage that you seem to have at your young age. Those kids, toward the end of that interview, that brainstorming session, were asked another question. What do you want your rabbi to say this Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? Hands went up, imaginary hands. Some of them were on Zoom. Little yellow hands, perfect hands. They said messages of hope, messages of resilience, messages of unity, messages of triumph, messages of the Jewish story being a story of endurance. When I look at those kids and think about those kids and think about so many of you who have those kids and those grandkids, I want to tell you that we are a remarkable people. With all of our faults, our frailties, our foibles, our embarrassing moments, even our embarrassing individuals. We are a remarkable people. And you know who knows that? These Christians that host us. They remind us of that. We have a church that comes on Thursday nights and on Sundays, a black church that prays in our synagogue. They fill the place every week. The pastor and I had coffee a couple weeks ago, and he said to me, "Brother, you're the chosen people." He said, "I always want to do right by you." He said, "I'm going to say this Sunday. Is that okay? I'm going to say this Sunday." He said, "I always want to be mindful of the house that I'm in and the people who are hosting me." Let's be mindful of that. One of the messages I want to say to you and to those college kids is we have so many friends. It's so easy to say everybody hates us. Let's not exaggerate, not everybody. So many people love us and admire us. Do you know that Judaism is still the most admired religion, time after time, survey after survey, in America? The most admired religion in America is Judaism. There's so many people who are on our side. In ancient days, we had a story, our central theme as a Jewish people. It was the story of Pesach. And the story of Pesach, you know, was standing on this side of a shore as slaves. And the text says, Mesayem beginut u'mesayem b'shevach. The text says, just in a few words, it starts in this kind of lowliness and misery and it ends in glory. And you and I are on the other side of that body of the water and on the other side of that point in history and know the truth of that statement. That we've stood here before. We've stood at these shores asking ourselves, will we perish or will we endure? And God has said, with an outstretched arm, I will lead you across those waters. And the water won't even touch your feet. And time again, it's been true. In the time of the destruction of the temple, the prophet Jeremiah, now think about that point in history. To that moment in history, that was the greatest cataclysmic moment, the greatest catastrophe in Jewish history. The destruction of the temple. The prophet Jeremiah says, no more will there be rejoicing in the streets of Jerusalem. He says, no more will bride and groom rejoice on the hilltops or the streets of Judah. And yet just 2 weeks ago, and under every chuppah of every wedding, I say the opposite of that. Od yishama be'arei Yehuda uv'chotzot Yerushalayim, kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. There shall still be heard in the streets and the hills the rejoicing, the sound of joy and laughter of the bride and the groom. So we're the people who overturn the decree, even the prophet's words. The prophet Ezekiel, in another time of grief, of consternation, of turmoil, of high anxiety for the Jewish people, said, Avda tikvatenu. That's the end. We don't have hope anymore. Listen to the two words I just said, Avda tikvatenu. Somewhere in your mind you recognize them. Because what we say in Hatikva, the anthem of that flag of our people, of Am Yisrael, is Od lo avda tikvatenu. We take Ezekiel's words that say our hope is gone, it's lost. We say the opposite. We add just one word to the beginning and we say our hope is not lost. That's the Jewish people. That's Am Yisrael. So let's go with wide eyes into this new year, realizing, yes, the world is a dangerous place, that anti-Semitism is going through the roof. Let's remind ourselves that if our great-grandfather walked in right now, he wouldn't believe how good it is to be a Jew in America right now. That there's never been a safer time or a better place on the planet to be Jewish people than here in this country. Gmar Chatima Tova.